Hey, how you doing? My name is MK0, and I've seen a Neo Geo cartridge in person. Those things are massive. Real quick before we get started, I'd like to thank everyone who's tuned in and checked out some of the previous videos, especially the Switch 2 video. I really appreciate it, and it's very nice to see. Speaking of the Switch 2 video, something I said in that one is where I'm going to be jumping off for this. Specifically, that games do not need to be as expensive as they are today. No matter what any out-of-touch, overpaid executive has to say about it, games don't need to be this expensive. It's gotten to a point where more and more people are rightfully very angry about it. And they should be, because it doesn't have to be this way. Before I really start getting into the topic at hand, I'd like to make a couple of things very clear so that everybody knows where I'm coming from. I am not an economist. I am not the CEO of a billion-dollar game company. And I am also not knowledgeable in massive computer servers. So let's just keep that in mind. But what I am is I am old enough to have seen video games greatly evolve in a relatively short period of time. I'm in industrial manufacturing, and I'm also the son of a salesman. So let's keep those things in mind so you get an idea of what I know and sort of my perspective. I don't want anybody thinking, that I'm trying to sound like a know-it-all here. I don't. I'll put that out there right now. There are certain things that I probably don't have a massive understanding of, but I'm just going off of perspective and what I've seen and what I know. Don't get too mad at me if I get something wrong, please. All right, that's out of the way. So let's get into it, and let's start at the main information point that people seem to be pointing to when talking about the outrage of the $70 game or the $80 game. Video games used to be that expensive back in the 90s. And this is true. But there was actually a reason for that. The reason being production costs, parts and labor and manufacturing. Video games came on cartridges, and cartridges were expensive to make because they were very hard plastic shells, and in that shell was a custom-made circuit board with various components attached to it. An actual physical product that took a lot of time and skill to assemble, until automation, of course, but still. A lot of parts. And this was, again, back in the 90s, so these parts were fairly new for the time and were more expensive than what they would come to be. I mean, take a look at hard drives, flash memory, things of that nature, and how they start out really expensive, and then as time goes on, they get cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. So this is the very beginnings of that. The cartridge-based systems were essentially solid-state hardware. So we start with that, and huge production costs, and very primitive games. So we'll stick with 90s for now, because that's what I mentioned in the beginning. So let's say, again, Super Nintendo, because a lot of people are pointing to games like Killer Instinct costing $80 or more, brand new. So, but just compared to now, much simpler games, simpler to make, simpler to design, simpler to run. 2D sprites. If anything, they were doing... I forget what the process is called, but it's they take a 3D image, render it, and then sort of turn that into sprites and put that... I can't believe I forgot what the term is, though. It'll come to me towards the end of the recording. Maybe I'll throw it in. But point is, I'm getting off track. Simple stuff. And you needed basic hardware for that. As games advanced, the hardware wasn't able to handle it. So then you had to add more advanced hardware. A better game needed better parts, and that meant more money. So there's your cost right there. Why one Super Nintendo game could cost $40 and another one could cost twice as much, because it needed better or more components to run it properly. And even then, sometimes they didn't run great at all. That was more a symptom of the time. And for real, really crazy comparison, look into the Neo Geo, because the Neo Geo was basically arcade cartridges, the same giant arcade cartridges that they used in the actual cabinets on this little player that you could actually bring home. It was the exact same hardware, they just put in a different plastic shell. These things are massive. I have seen one in person. I saw one at a retro store by me, and I asked it, "Can I see it? Can I see it, please?" Because I had only seen these things in videos, and these things are huge. They're the size of an NES. It's ridiculous. But at the time, that's what you had to do to get arcade perfect graphics. Was just these giant boards in giant slabs of plastic and just loads of electrical components and a lot of soldering. Now, eventually, as time went on, as the N64 will show you, you're able to get a lot more out of a lot smaller form factor. That's just how things go. You start somewhere, and eventually it gets figured out more and more, and you get more out of less. Just take a look at the evolution of the cell phone, and that'll give you a good idea. So anyways, at the time with games in the 90s, you have these expensive cartridges, and again, people were not happy about it. The games were getting more and more expensive. And then came CDs, CD technology. Because in comparison to cartridges, CDs were unbelievably cheap to make. All they did was hold the data. So as long as you had something to read that data, and that was doing all the legwork. And starting with, like the Sega Genesis and the Sega CD add-on, the TurboGrafx had a CD add-on. CD add-ons started to become a thing. The Atari Jaguar had one. And this was, again, the early days of CD technology. And like the early days of most technologies, it sucked. You want to talk about waiting for your day one update for your fancy brand new game. I lived through the load times. I lived through the PS1 load times, and that wasn't even the worst of it. And it wasn't even a one-time thing like your update. That's just how it worked the entire time. You would hit start, and then you just have to sit there and wait for it to get to the main menu. So things have definitely improved in a sideways sort of way. That's a topic for another time, and I'm looking forward to making that one. So again, CDs, cheap to make. Console manufacturers really want to get on board with CDs, so that way I don't have to keep spending so much money making cartridges. Except for Nintendo, they wanted to stick with cartridges for one more time around. And because of that, the PlayStation was basically able to just steamroll everybody as soon as they hit the market at a $299 price point for the console itself, which was the console price point was the other part of the business model. It's get the console in as many hands as possible. So sell it for cheap, sell it at a loss. I believe even to this day, consoles are still sold at some kind of a loss. I mentioned the Neo Geo. That was unbelievably expensive, but still sold at a loss. There was also I believe it was the 3DO, where they tried to sell it at market value, and back in the 90s, it was like $700, so you could understand why nobody bought it. But the idea was get the console in as many hands as possible, and then make the money off of not just the games and software you were selling for it, but also the software licenses. People paying to get their games on your system to make money. And thanks to the essentially stable production cost of CDs and it being so dirt cheap, you kind of had like a standardized game price for the first time. As long as you had that CD medium, your games were pretty much the same price, which I believe was $50. But also on older games, when they would do sort of a second run or another printing of them, you had things like the PlayStation Greatest Hits, and you had the Nintendo's Player Choice. Later on, you had the Xbox Platinum Hits, and those were sold even cheaper, because you could get away with it. Again, I mentioned production costs. They're compared to what they're selling it for, the production costs are cheap, pretty much in any form of manufacturing, from what they're paying to make the product versus what they're selling it for. There's a huge markup in there. So, on this disc-based medium, it was easier to make money because you didn't have to spend a whole lot on components and parts. Even with the switch over to DVDs and Blu-rays, it's still just the same kind of disc. It just has more available space on it for more stuff. So to my knowledge, there wasn't a huge jump in production costs between CD versus DVD versus Blu-ray. So then with the advent of high-speed internet and just everybody having the internet and it getting really good and really easy to use, the next step was digital. Instant delivery of things from their big servers in wherever the hell they are to your living room directly into your eyeballs. Now, this is the part where, remember I mentioned in the beginning that I only know certain things and I don't know a lot about servers. This is something I question. I don't know, but I'm going to mention it. And then if anybody does know better than me, they can correct me on it in the comments section. That's what it's there for. Server maintenance and running servers seems to be cheaper than production runs. Like, again, with digital, you have no production costs. You don't have to print discs, print box art, make boxes. It's just all there on this big server. I know you have to pay maintenance costs and the electricity to run it and things of that nature. I tried looking into how much something like that would run. I got kind of varied answers. So I don't know. It seems like it would be more cost effective because you're also not doing major print runs and you don't ever have to worry about inventory. It's just all there all the time. So I could be wrong on this, and it could even out a little more than I think, but it does seem like a better deal. Plus, if it wasn't, I don't think companies would be all gung-ho over it. Digital seems to be the big movement for a lot of reasons, which I'm not going to get into here. But long and short of it, that's why games were more expensive back in the day, because of the production costs. That was the main factor as to why games were more expensive. This was also much smaller teams, much simpler to make, took less time. Games were getting knocked out in under a year sometimes. As they got more complex, those time frames grew. The staff needed to make it happen grew. The skill set evolved. And that, I would like to think that factors in a little bit as to why certain games are more expensive. But again, the trade-off of less production, plus, let's face it, the guys working on it, they're not seeing nearly enough of the money. They are not, pure and simple, they're not getting paid enough for that shit, honestly. And they should be getting paid a whole hell of a lot more. And believe me, I'd love it if the higher cost of games translated to a better living for the people making them. But it's very disheartening to see that is not the case. In the same breath, a company will announce that a game did very well and made a lot of money, and we're laying off the entire team that made it for whatever reason. So anyone saying that the added cost goes to the actual people making the games, I'm not buying it. And this is one of the things that kind of fired me up a little bit more to tackle this topic first above everything else. Like, I wanted to make a video about how awesome it is to be a pro wrestling fan, and I'm going to make that one later, but I wanted to get this one out of the way first while I'm still all nice and angry about a couple of these quotes. Again, all this stuff is aimed at Nintendo right now because of the price of the Switch 2 console, and more importantly, the $80 price tag for Mario Kart World. And recently, the VP of Product and Player Experience, Bill Tritton, and Nintendo of America President Doug Bowser decided to sort of weigh in on why Mario Kart World specifically is as expensive as it is. I'm going to read the quote here courtesy of Game Informer, which is back, and I'm very happy to see them back. But this was also courtesy of IGN. They sat down with IGN, and Game Informer is where I read this. So this is Bill Tinhat saying, I would say it's less about the strategy of pricing Mario Kart World. It's more just wherever we look at a given game, we just look at what is the experience and what's the content and what's the value. And Bowser would go on to say, old Nintendo president Dingus Bingus here would say, we look at what the game has to offer. I think fans will find this is an incredibly full, deeply immersive experience that fans can expect when it comes to playing this particular game. And I'm just going to say this right now. My counter argument to that is you don't get to make that call, because of course you're going to think it's the greatest thing ever and that it's worth every penny that you're charging, because you made it and you're the one selling it to me. You're not going to tell me that it's only worth $40 if you're trying to sell it for $80, now would you? And I get it. They were asked the question, and this is just them trying to make the best of the situation that they're currently stuck in. But again, of course, you're going to tell me all these things to try and justify the price tag that you set for it. And my second counterpoint to that statement is that I've paid a grand total of $25 for 2 copies of Balatro, one on my Xbox One and one on my PC, and I've been having a blast with those. I've been having loads of fun. I've been playing them for hours on end, and I didn't have to pay $80 for that. I bought One Piece Pirate Warriors 4 for $30 some odd with all the DLC at the time included, and I've put at least 100 hours into that, maxing out characters and just putzing around and having fun. But again, I didn't have to pay $80 for that. Saints Row 2, one of my favorite games of all time. Massive open world, lots of secrets, lots of fun stuff to do. $30? $30. And worth every penny. I have gotten many of the Call of Duty games, not when they came out for $50, $60 because it wasn't worth it then, but I ended up getting them after the fact for like $2 a pop, and ended up having a lot of fun with them. Mostly because of the offline, multiplayer that me and my buddy could play, couch co-op style with bots, like. Anybody else play Perfect Dark? God, I miss Perfect Dark. Anyways, I'm rambling. The point I'm making is that what you end up paying for something and the fun and excitement and time spent you're going to get out of it is subjective and varies on a lot of different factors, but mostly it's just subjective. Don't try to tell me out the gate, oh no, we've packed in $80 worth of content here. There have been plenty of other games that have sold for $60, and you try to play them for 5 minutes and you're like, wow, I hate this. I paid $5 for Perfect Weapon on PS1, and it's the only time that I've ever regretted paying $5 on a gamble for a game that I've never heard of or seen before because I thought the box art was cool. Remember that. Perfect Weapon is the worst game ever. The major takeaway from all this and all my rambling and storytelling and everything that I've said here, if you're not happy with $80 Mario Kart and you're not happy with a $450 Switch 2 and you don't want these things to continue happening, do not buy them. The only way that any of these companies are going to learn that this isn't okay is if it fails miserably. The reason things like $5 character skins and battle passes that you have to pay for and microtransactions and things of that nature are still going is because people are still buying them. If everybody goes out and buys Mario Kart brand new at $80, then that's going to send the message that it's okay. And then everybody's going to do $80 video games and try to justify it by saying, no, there's $80 worth of content in here, which they can't tell you that. They can't make that decision for you. There's going to be some people who play a game and end up playing it for hours and hours on end, and there's going to be some people who can only stand it for 10 minutes because it's not for them. It used to be you made a game and you made it good, and the way you made more money was the game being good and more people buying it. Now it's just trying to squeeze as much money as you can out of one person, which isn't right. Again, it's not right. Show them that. Show them that it's not right. Don't buy it. If you're not happy with $80 Mario Kart, don't buy it. Because if and when that game fails because of the $80 price tag, they'll change their tune. But that's what it's going to take. It happened before with the 3DS, and it can sure as hell happen again. Anyways, I hope that you enjoyed this. I'm sorry that it got a little real in a couple of spots. Again, I know I try to keep this as lighthearted and fun as possible, but it's something that I really just wanted to get out of my system and talk about. And again, just sort of put that message out there. If you're not happy with what they're doing, don't let them get away with it. Don't buy it. But again, hopefully you either found this informative or entertaining or some combination of the two if I'm lucky. And as always, this is the part where I say the comments are open. I know that they're always open, but let me have this. Let me have the little gimmick at the end. How do you feel about all this? About the pricing? Do you think that some of it's justified? Do you think they're completely out of line? And on a more fun note, what's a game that you paid very little for that you got a lot of value out of? And what's a game that you paid a lot for and didn't get a lot of value of? And above all else, I'd like to thank each and every one of you for listening and giving me the time. You take care.